and we discovered then we were going to England. We flew from Trinidad then to Belém, Brazil, which is in right near the mouth of the Amazon River. As we flew across the mouth of the Amazon River, we had crew members saying, "We're going in the wrong, something wrong here. We're going out into the ocean. That thing is so wide." I think where we crossed about 125 miles across, and we went to Natal, Brazil, and our co-pilot had a brother who was stationed there, who was in the Navy, and this was the place where the German battleship was sunk. Jesse Reed,
Is that the Graf Spee or the Bismarck? Which one?
Bismarck.
Bismarck.
No, I don't believe it was.
I believe it's the Graf Spee that was scuttled there.
I believe it was. We saw that things, a little bit sticking out of the water. And from there we flew across the Atlantic, but this was called the southern route to go to England. They had a northern route, which you go from Maine up into Labrador, Greenland, Iceland, and so on into Ireland and down. But this was in April of '44. The weather was still bad in the northern route, and we took the long way around to get better flying weather. We landed at Dakar in what was French West Africa at that point, and then we flew to Marrakesh, and we landed there. One of my classmates that I told you about that I graduated with in high school was on that base at that time. Neither one of us knew it. I didn't see him, but he had been in the infantry in North Africa, and that's where he was stationed, and he was guarding this airport in which we landed. But again, he didn't know I was there, and I didn't know he was there, and we didn't see each other. Then we went on into...
Was that, let me, excuse me if interrupting, is that where you saw your first B-29?
That's where I saw my first B-29. It too had taken off from Kansas, but in place of taking the route that we took, it had flown from Kansas directly across the ocean, one stop to Marrakesh. Now, Marrakesh was a kind of a hub. Some planes went the southern route like we went, and when we got to Marrakesh, the place going to England, they went on to India and across into China and Burma, fighting the Japanese. A lot of them taking supplies. We landed there and had a little bad weather, and when the sky cleared for us to take out, as I remember in our briefing, they were warning us to be careful because the planes were taking off one every 5 minutes, and they were going to be doing that for 2 days, trying to clear that airbase, playing them every 5 minutes for 2 days, because they were going both directions. Some of those planes coming back to the States around that way too, and it really was a hub. We went out when we took off from Marrakesh. We went northwest, and we wanted to be sure we got out into the ocean as we went up the coast of Europe. We were warned about the seaport at Lisbon because they told us there would be some battleships and other warships there, and you don't want to fly over them. Well, the wind was such that we got a little closer to it than we had planned, and we were in clouds, or over cloud cover. We couldn't see. And long about that time, we broke out, and we were pretty close, so we moved on out into the ocean a little bit. We were flying the 10th degree west longitude from there on into England. We landed in Wales the 5th of May and spent the night there, and then went the next day to our base in Halesworth, England, which was over in East Anglia, pretty close to Norwich, England, about 125 miles northeast of London. And that's where we were stationed.
You told me about an occasion where you were on a training flight and a returning flight from bombing raids, and you ran into each other. Relate that to us.
Okay, we had a training mission in England before we flew our first combat mission. And we had gone up in the northern part of England somewhere. And on the way back, we were getting pretty close into our area, but that whole area in there was covered with air bases. The comment was made that when this war is over, all England's got to do is connect some runways and they'll have major highways all over this part of the country. And that's how close they were. But as we were coming back, we were headed, I'm going to say in a general direction of south. There was a bomber group of 17s returning from a mission, and they were basically going west, and they were coming across in front of us. But it's quite obvious that if both held their course, there's going to pretty well be some intermingling here. And our group was flying in a position that in the States regulations would have been you had the right of way, so to speak. But apparently nobody leading our group knew that over there in England, in the war zone, a group coming back from a mission had the right of way over everybody if that wasn't on a mission, which is right the way it should have been. And we got pretty close together, and actually the two groups didn't tangle, but we had two airplanes that touched and both of them went down. And I have a picture of that, which I will show you. I think that's the question.
Yeah, that's the incident I was asking about.
So we lost two planes there in mid-air collision, 20 men, before we ever started flying.
When was your first mission, actual bombing mission?
Actual bombing mission was May the 30th, 1944. And we went to Oldenburg, Germany. I can tell you about my first mission. I can't tell you about my last one. I don't remember anything about it. But
I would imagine the first one would stick with you.
Yeah. At the last one, I didn't know that it was my last one. My crew flew 27 missions. I was on a lead crew, and we did not fly every day. Our second mission was for my crew, was D-Day. And right after D-Day, we had a lot of crews that would fly 2 missions a day, because from there across the channel to France was not very far, and they'd fly a mission in the morning, a mission in the afternoon. And long in August, some of those had their 25 missions in. Now, the 25 missions was considered a tour of duty and what you were supposed to do when we got over there. But then we weren't flying every day, and first thing we knew, they had raised it from 25 to 30, so we got caught with 30 missions, being our tour. I never did know how they came up with the number of 25 to start with until recently. I have read that the powers that be early on said we've got to give these boys a goal to shoot at. If they're just going to stay over here forever, they're going to be so disheartened. They just see no chance of ever going home. And they came up with 25 as giving a crew a 50-50 chance to finish 25 missions. If your goal was 25 and you had a 50-50 chance. Now, they never told us that, but that's what they figured behind, according to this article. And again, being D-Day, this is where the fighting was really taking place, far as the Navy is concerned, far as the ground troops are concerned. But as far as the Air Corps is concerned, it was winding down because of the Germans were running out of fuel. We had been bombing them all in 43 and early 44, and that's the oil well raid, oil refinery raid that you've read about so much, had really damaged their oil supply, gasoline supply. And I flew 27 missions and never actually saw a German plane in the air that I knew for sure that it was. Saw more than one on the ground because we bombed a lot of airfields. We would bomb the runways to prevent them from taking off or landing on it, and do some interruptions that way, and see them sitting on the ground. But there was one day that I suspected it was a German fighter. A P-51 was chasing it. But this was toward the end of my tour, and the Germans at that point had a few jets. Now, we didn't know exactly what a jet was, but we knew it was fast. And this one was going off and leaving a P-51 that I saw, and the P-51 was the best that we had. So I assumed that this was a German jet, and he wasn't about to fight. He was getting away. So I was fortunate in that the heavy fighting from the air was pretty well over as far as at that time when we got there. Now the flak was a different story. It was still had plenty of flak, and it was interesting around in France and Belgium, Holland, close in there. You didn't have all that much, but it was extremely accurate. You get in over the German cities, and they'd throw up barrages, and you'd see as you're coming, you can see all this bursts of flak in front of you. Now, when a shell goes off, it makes a pop. Here's a smoke, and it just kind of sits there. Well, if you can imagine, these shells just keep coming up and popping there. They fill the whole sky full of that smoke. Now, all the shrapnel and stuff's going to do the damage is done gone, but you're still looking at that smoke, and you just say, there's no way you can fly through that. But you do, and of course you take some hits and so on, but it's not as bad as it looks, what I'm trying to say.
He has did you see it? Excuse me. A piece of his flak jacket with a piece of shrapnel in it where he got hit in the side.
Dude, really? God. Well, see, that's the thing I was going to ask you, is like, how well armored were the planes, you know? And
the planes weren't armored.
so they weren't. And that's the
Tell
thing.
them about the plane. What plane were you flying most?
B-24s, which is a 4-engine bomber. Supposedly maybe a better plane than the B-17, although the B-17 probably primarily because of the notoriety of the Memphis Belle had more and still gets more publicity than the B-24 ever got, but lots more of them built, and we carried more bombs. We were a little bit faster. They had us manned, I think, a little bit on. They could fly higher than we could. I always thought they could. We have had a few occasions when they'd be up over us dropping bombs down through our squadron. You don't like that too much, but they weren't doing it on purpose. As far as armament concerned, we had a steel plate about, I'd say, maybe this big square on the side of the airplane, by the side of the pilot and the co-pilot.
That's all?
That's all.
Well, you can't, the weight, I guess, is the big
Yeah.
issue on that.
Yeah. Yeah, you can
point.
imagine if the whole thing was that way, they couldn't have carried any bombs or speak of, because that was
Still
heavy.
frightening, though, I would say.
But they gave the pilots that much protection. We all wore flak suit, which I can testify to the fact that it could save your life.
Yeah, David had to get a shot of that piece of flak in his jacket.
That's the thing. That's what. I need those types of things more than everything. That's one of the things I think is so unique is that each person has certain.
Tell us, James Trigg, about the time you went to London and were in your experience in going into the hotel that had been bombed and eating the meal and so forth. If you remember that.
Okay. I guess I have tremendous respect for the English people. Now this is 44, and England's been in this thing since 39, and they have taken some terrible beatings, and they had pretty good Air Force at that point, fighter planes, and they were pretty well protecting the cities, but we come up with these buzz bombs. Now this is something new, and they were launching quite a few of them. Now, those buzz bombs were, of course, pilotless, and they didn't fly very high, so it was hard to detect and get a fighter up where they could take them out. And they would come in, and the way they managed to get the target that they wanted, they used it on big cities like London, some other pretty good sized cities, and they put enough fuel in those things, and when that fuel ran out, it'd be over that city somewhere, and just wherever it was, well, it crashed, and that's when it exploded. And we got a 3-day pass, our crew did, and we went to London. My bombardier and I went to this hotel and registered. Now, only people that's left in England in the way of manpower basically were old people, old men, and children. But at that point, while we were there, I'm not sure when I say we were there, while we were in England, well, these buzz bombs started coming. They evacuated the children out of London, sent them out to friends and relatives and the country to get them out of the way of being killed by these buzz bombs, because you didn't know where they were going to hit. This old fellow was taking my bombardier and me to our room, and we're going down this hallway, and here's rooms with the doors open, and there's glass all over the rooms. The windows are out, and finally we went about 3 rooms like that, and we said to the old fellow, "What's happened here?" And he said, "Oh boy, buzz bomb landed right out front last night and blew this front off, all our windows out, and so we haven't had a chance to clean it up." we go on down. He finds our room over on the left side of the hallway, which is inside, a little further away from the street, which made us happy about that. And then we go down to the lower floor to eat dinner, and we are eating dinner, and the alarm goes off. So we ask, one of us asked the other one, wonder where, well, I can't think of the name of it.
Bomb shelters?
Bomb shelter. Wonder where their bomb shelter is in this hotel. And the other one says, well, I don't know, but we don't have to worry about it. We'll follow the English people when they start going to it. And now, before we got through saying that, here goes the second alarm off, which means that thing is getting close. And almost immediately the third alarm, which says it's here. And nobody is moving. And we looked at each other and finally said, you know, they're not going to go. And they said, well, if they can sit through it, I guess we can too. So we went on about, ate our dinner, and directly we heard the bomb go off and on down the street somewhere, quite a little ways away from us. But those English people, you knew it was disturbing them, but they wasn't going to let it interfere with their business. You had the subways was a big way of traveling around town, and at night, as you go into those steps going down, you come to a landing and you make a turn, and you go to another landing and turn. Those landings were full of English people at night with their pillows and their blankets and quilts and so on, sleeping there because that was the safest place that they could find, and get up the next day and go on about their work. It's just still amazing to me how they did those things.
You have any other missions that stand out in your mind? Of course, you mentioned the first one. You don't remember the last one. Were there any others in between there that?
Well, yeah, there were several missions that stood out. Of course, this D-Day mission, you'll always remember that. Being on the lead crew, we were called for a briefing at 9 o'clock, which was very unusual. We usually got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, thereabouts, ate breakfast, and went and had our briefing for the mission, and then go right on out to the line and get our equipment and take off for that particular mission. On this mission, they called the lead crews in, specially, which you didn't usually do either. Sometimes it did, but gave us our target and cautioned us about, when we leave this room, you do not talk even to each other about it. They were so afraid that information would get out. They couldn't believe that it would, but they weren't taking any chances. Our mission was St. Lowell, which was in the peninsula up there, Cherbourg Peninsula, back in behind, but it's a railroad junction. Railroads come into there from 2 or 3 different directions, and then go out to the seaports in that Cherbourg Peninsula and so on. And that was a good target, but it was now, at the time they were giving us the briefing, troops were already leaving on the way across the channel. That kind of gets you to, this thing's already going. And there were going to be paratroopers going in the night. And St. Lowell was their target. You've seen the picture of the paratrooper swinging from the steeple at St. Lowell, I believe. So we were not to drop our bombs unless we could absolutely see our target. And that was our briefing. So we go back to our barracks for the night, and by this time it's probably 10 or 10:30. And of course, the rest of the boys in the barracks wanted to, well, what was this briefing about? Where are we going? And we couldn't tell them. Well, when you couldn't tell them, that told them something, you know. But it had been the activity, the movement of troops, and so on. Everybody knew that something was ready to break. On top of that, the word was out that you only had a little gap here, maybe a week or 10 days at the most, where you could possibly do it from the weather standpoint. That was around the 6th of June, 4th or 5th or 6th of June. 4th a bad night, 5th was a bad night, and Eisenhower said on the 6th, okay, we're going to go. And the 6th, we did go. We go to bed. Finally, my pilot says, boys, it could be a long day tomorrow. We better see if we can get some sleep. So everybody, like a bunch of little children, just turned the lights out and went to bed. But nobody went to sleep. And about 12, a little after, the lights come on and the orderly comes in and, gentlemen, you're to report to for breakfast in a half an hour or something like that. And so we were eating and back in the briefing room, and take off a long time before we were going to be leaving. And we circled and we circled and circled. And the only reason for it, I guess, is anybody in command of a unit wanted to be sure his unit was up there ready to go, take no chances on it. So we wasted a lot of time flying before it became our time to go. And as we leave the coast, you see all of these ships. You can't imagine how many ships were in the channel. But halfway across, we hit solid cloud cover beneath us. And we go on to our target area, and it's still cloudy. We can't see anything, so we come home and bring our bombs. And for us being of any help on D-Day, we were no help whatsoever. So that was, I guess, a disappointment. We had I'll try to relate this to you as a personal thing. The thought going through my mind the night before, how important it is that this be successful. There've been talk pro and con whether we could actually invade France or not, with the defense that the Germans had. And this is the only time that I ever felt like that my life didn't matter, if it took that for it to be successful. Thank goodness it didn't take it. And but on other missions, I was never willing to say, you can have my life if this mission is successful. We'll never see the numbers probably of ships or planes again as we did at that point. Well, you've got one plane now that carries as many bombs as our whole group did, I guess. 6,000 pounds was a maximum load for our, maybe you could get 8,000 for short runs, but we'd carry 12 500 pounders or 3 2,000 pounders. We had a few of those. But you've seen these big planes that they got now, and they just drop them out for our ages. They just keep them falling out. So.
And rockets from ships a long way away.
Yeah. So We don't need as many ships as we used to have, but these bigger. And these fighter planes that we have now are bigger than our bombers were. Get back to your question on different missions. We had a mission again in this. We had a lot of missions in this St. Lo area in France there, because of D-Day, the invasion. We were protecting there and knocking out bridges and trying to interrupt their transportation system. And General Patton comes in, and he comes in, his reputation, he's going to run over everything. And he does, and he goes down beside that Cherbourg Peninsula and then cuts around to the west when it gets there toward Brest and makes a big circle in there and then comes back. And when he gets in there, now here's the Germans along here, he breaks the line, but he turns and goes here, and all they got to do is come in here and cut him off. And they were just about to do it. So we have two missions, our group does, and I flew one of them. And our mission was to drop bombs on the front lines of the Germans, where their positions were, and we were given their position. Here is a road, and they're on the other side of that road. If you start at that road and spread through there, now the whole 8th Air Force was coming in there. And to further identify, so we don't get the road mixed up, our troops back here are going to fire artillery into that area, smoke artillery, kick up a big smoke line. And we come in over there, and there is the smoke line. And we start dropping our bombs on it. And we killed a general on the ground of ours. I remember my bombardier saying, "I don't think we've gone far enough." And I said, "Well, Chuck, there's your smoke line, and that's what they told us to drop it on, so we do." Now, when I say we, I don't know about our plane being the ones that killed him or not, but somebody in our group did, or they thought it did. And Ernie Pyle has written a story on that. He was on the ground in the 25th of July, and I think my mission was the 24th. I wasn't on the one that he was writing about, but he had, I thought, a terribly good description of what it must have been like to have been on the ground on that thing. And that was an interesting mission and a bad mission. The second day was because we messed it up on the first day, and we messed it up exactly the same thing on the second day. The wind was still blowing out of the south and moving that smoke back towards our troops. And I don't know why the briefing people didn't emphasize it more, that you got to watch out for that, but anyway, it did. Another mission in the St. Lo area, we had a plane in our group that took a direct hit, and it was such a hit that just almost immediately the plane came all to pieces, and you were flying through that junk, what was left. That's a bad experience, and it's a navigator's duty to log what instances that takes place, and I think every navigator in the group wrote down there no survivors. And a few weeks later, the radio operator on that airplane walked into our area, and he was wearing a backpack parachute, and he was blown completely from out of the mess some way or other, and really wasn't hurt that much. He was taken in by the French and into the underground, and they worked him around and came out through Spain and back to England.
Wow.
And that was the whole story makes an interesting story. Another mission that we had, I guess, I think probably the best navigation job that I ever did in my life, and one of the most pressure group missions that I ever flew. We went into France to drop bombs on a suspected buzz bomb launching site. We had several missions for those buzz bombs, and I don't know whether any of them were ever successful or not. They were extremely hard to locate, first thing, and it was a small area that you had to hit, and hard to find, hard to hit. But we went in as a group, 3 squadrons, and as we hit the coast, the 3 squadrons went to 3 different targets. And the English had a navigation instrument that we called a G-box. And I don't remember now what G stood for, but we just call it the G-box. It was a radar system. And short ranges, it was extremely good, extremely fast, and I used that. Reception was real good, and I was able to take a fix every minute. Now, to take a fix, be in your position, I could get my position exactly every minute. And then I was supposed to record that in my log, my time and so on. Now, before we take off, as we go into our planes, I hadn't thought that much. I knew I was going to be leading the squadron, and I knew that I had a lot of responsibility. But crew members on other crews began to say, "Lieutenant Pace, don't you get us in trouble today. You keep us out of that flak." This was an area where the flak was not that thick, but was real accurate. And that kind of began to build on me some way or other. Anyway, we drop our bombs. Now, coming out, we've got a little town where we know this flak here in front of us, and a little to our right. Directly in front of us is another little town where we know this flak, and I've got to get these 12 planes and tell the pilot where to turn, when to turn, to stay away from this one and stay away from that one. And in there, lead plane's carrying 2 navigators. One of them is sitting in that nose turret with the machine guns, and he's got a map, and he knows we're coming up on this city out here. And so he calls me and tells me, we're coming up on this town we got to stay away from. And I said, "Yeah, Bob, I know it." And he said, "Well, we're going to be right at it." And I said, "Yeah, but we got to get a little closer to it before we can turn, because the one on our right." And he got so fixed on that one, he wasn't paying any attention to the one on the right. It's what I always thought. I'm not sure anyway. And finally, the pilot called me. I don't know whether he had gone directly to the pilot without my hearing him or not, but I hadn't heard him talk to the pilot. And my pilot said, "Jim, you know where we are?" And I said, "Sure I do, Gus." And I said, "You're going to have to turn in a few minutes, but I'll tell you when. We've got this location over on our right here where we've got to get by it." And he said, "Okay," and that's the last I heard from anybody. So when we made our turn, my partner, navigator in the turret, said, "Phew, that was close." And I said, "Look over on your right." And of course, it's under our wing over here now. And he said, well, that was close too. So
He didn't even pay attention to that.
I think I've always felt like that was the best job that I did, but the pressure did build. And I had a little hard time going to sleep at night, getting relaxed enough to go to sleep. Otherwise, ordinarily, I didn't have that much trouble. But on that same mission, one of the other squadrons went to another target, and they were off to our right. We could see them, and as they were coming across the coastline, and in the coastline, you always had to be careful with it because there's always fortifications along that coastline. But as he was coming out, the pilot, other pilots in the squadron reported this. Somebody called him on the radio and told him he was leading the squadron. He needed to make a correction of 5 degrees to the right. And he did. But when he did, that brought him right over this little town. And his crew was shot down. And again, this was a horrible scene in that we were trying to count the people as bailing out. This was part of the crew, how many bailed out, how many you think made it out, and so that they count for them, either missing in action or killed and so on. But every one of these, you'd see them bail out and you'd count them all right, but the quick as they popped that parachute, it'd go up in flames. And I never did know the reason for that, but there was fire had gotten into their parachutes some way or other, and of course when it popped, the air made it flash up. The story on it was, and everybody official reported was, this caller was a German who spoke English and had him to come over so he took the whole 12 right over the gun position rather than miss it like he was doing if he hadn't listened to that.
When did you leave Europe or England?
We left England in November. Our bomb group was pulled out. It was one of the, probably next to the last one that came to England. And then we were pulled out as a bomb group and brought back to the United States and went to Tucson, Arizona, and went into B-29 training. And we had completed our B-29 training when they dropped the 2 atomic bombs, but our ground crew was already on its way, and we had a footlocker that each officer had a footlocker, and that was going by boat. It had already gone. So hadn't been for those 2 bombs, we would have been gone to, I think we were going to Okinawa. I never was quite sure about that, but that's where they were doing a lot of bombing from Okinawa to Japan.
So they were training you to fly the B-29s in the Japanese
right
area.
We turned around, we didn't know where we were going. We got aboard the ship. So this is May. On the 14th of May, we pulled away from the anchorage, and we stop out in the middle of the bay and drop the anchor. And we're all concerned, well, what are we stopping here for? And all of a sudden, I don't know if you've ever seen these big scow lighters that are pushed around some of the bays. They're flat, and tugs push them around with cargo all over them. Well, one of these things is pushed all right up next to us, and there's red flags all over it. And what it is, it's loaded with dynamite. And that's what we were loaded. The whole ship was loaded with dynamite, machinery parts for mining industries, all kinds of things like that. And they load us that day, that night, and we've got red flags all over the deck and everything else. And up anchor the next day, and we head out into the Atlantic Ocean, out New York Harbor, out into the ocean. And we could do, I think that probably some guys with a rowboat could go faster than us. We could do all of 9 knots. The normal good steaming ship, freighter, today is up in the range of 21, 22 knots. The good freighters in those days were 18 to 20 knots. So we could do all of 9. We couldn't go anywhere quietly because it was this old scow engine, reciprocating engine, boom, 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 boom. You could hear it all over the Atlantic Ocean. We're going down along the Atlantic coast, all by ourselves, no convoy, no escorts, nothing, loaded with dynamite. And we're going down. As we started to pass by the Carolinas, Florida, all you could see along the shoreline, burning tankers. The Germans were having a picnic. The German submarines were knocking off the American merchant fleet as fast as they could get them. And they were concentrating on tankers. I've often told people that if I was a German submarine captain, I wouldn't have wasted a torpedo on the ship that I was on, because it was an old scow. It couldn't be carrying anything important. And I'd probably come up from underwater and sink it with my cannons rather than wasting a torpedo, because they really wanted to knock out the big tankers. And they were doing a job. I don't know what the statistics were. Hundreds of merchant ships were sunk in the early part of the war. Where were we heading? We find out. We were going to go to South America. We lined up, we go down, and first port we pull into is Cristobal. That's on the east coast side of the Panama Canal. We go through the Panama Canal gingerly because they knew we had dynamite. They got us through. And in the middle of the Panama Canal, there's a Gatun Lake in there, and that's all fresh water. And when you're in the freshwater lake of Gatun, you run all your pumps and everything else to get the fresh water going through the circulating system to get rid of the salt water for corrosion. Submarines, we take our submarines and take them underground, under the water in the Gatun Lake, and they kill the particles. So anyway, we stay in the Gatun Lake for a day, and then we come on out, and Panama City is on the Pacific side. Then we start down along the west coast of South America, and we hit Ecuador, and we're doing all of this 9 knots that I'm telling you as fast as we can go. And we stop off at Callao, which is the seaport for Lima, Peru, and we unload some machinery parts there. And then we go down in a little bit further Antofagasta, and we unload some dynamite down there. But the target main city that we were going to was Valparaiso, Chile, which is quite a ways down along the coast. And if you look at your maps, you see how really narrow Chile is, all the way down to Del Fuego, down at the bottom of the continent. And we pulled in there, and all of the dynamite that we had on board was taken out, and it was going to the copper mines in Chile, which is a massive producer of Chile even to today. And then they loaded us back up with copper ingots to get back to the United States for the war effort. So that's really the first episode going into South America. And we came back up, same thing, through the canal. Our engine kept breaking down every once in a while, and we'd have to go at anchor along the coast, do repair work. This was an old dog, and it was worn out. And finally through the canal again. And the biggest danger then really was getting up to New Orleans, because if you look at the map, you wind up with the Yucatan Peninsula out there and the Yucatan Gulf in there, and the Germans were sitting there with their submarines, and they chased us right into the Mississippi River, because that's a long ways up to New Orleans from the Gulf of Mexico. So we finally got in there in shape, and we went in, dry dock, a lot of repairs, But while I was on board ship, I reported directly to the chief engineer. Now, this experience was taken many, many weeks and a couple of months for this whole transit. And I reported directly to the chief engineer.
Was this a type of apprenticeship you were doing as part of your training?
Absolutely. And he started off and he said, you ever been on board ship? I said, no, sir. And he said, okay, fine. We know it's an opportunity. He was proud to have a cadet assigned to the ship. It was not hurting his pride. He knew this was the right way to bring people into the business. Mm-hmm. And he started me and he said, okay, fine. I want you to go into the tool crib where all the supplies are. And I want you to do a complete inventory. I want you to tell me what I've got in there and tell parts and listings and take. I said, okay. I had to go in and find bolts of sizes, pipe nipples and elbows and all kinds of things and label them. And I was in there, it must have been a couple of weeks. So after that, he said, how's everything? I said, fine. He said, he looks around, I like what you did. I said, okay, now you go into the machine shop. Then they taught me how to run a lathe, a milling machine, a shaper, drill presses, sharpen tools, make parts, all. And all this time, this was in the middle of where I had to spend 3 hours in classwork. I had books I had to read. I had tests I have to take and mail back to the United States Merchant Marine Academy as part of this training program. But I also had to stand watch with the engineer in the engine room to learn how to run the throttle, work with the oiler to clean filters, oil machinery, do all of the hand work that the fellas have to do to keep their machinery going as an apprentice. But these guys all helping me. Now, you have to recognize I'm 18 years old. The deck cadet was 20 years old. Every other person on board that ship was an old hand merchant mariner. And I'm talking die-hard old seamen, old rough and tumble deckhands, really, and they were wonderful to us because they said, boy, what a nice way to have people come on in and learn their trade. Mm-hmm. So we back into New Orleans, fix up the ship, load up all over again. Fortunately, not dynamite this time. Machinery parts, mostly machinery parts, not military parts, but machinery for equipment and for trucks and different types of machinery. And then crates that we didn't even know what kind of machinery was in. And we head down the east coast of South America. We stop off at Trinidad, we head on down and we go on, and the big bulge in South America, if you look at your atlas, is a big city called Recife. And that's the closest jet point out into the Atlantic Ocean to Africa. And we were building a lot of air bases in there. Because if you look at what was going on in the world, it was the only route to get to India and China, and the other part of the world was to go around southern Africa and back up into the Indian Ocean, because they couldn't get out to the Pacific because the war was going on there. So it was a natural haven for the German subs to be out there, and they also had these freighters that were loaded up with guns. There's a technical term that I can't think of it right this minute. They were marauding ships that that the normal merchant ship would look at and say, oh, that's another freighter, and all of a sudden, boom, the sides come down and the gun's there, and they would blow pieces. But we didn't have any convoys at all. So we dropped off some machinery down in Recife, and we were close to the Amazon River. And we had to drop off some supplies there. And 90 miles up, the Amazon River is on my right-hand side, and there's another estuary there called the Pará River. And that goes up 90 miles to a city called Belém. It's a metropolis now. but it was an old city that was populated by the French people many generations ago. They had the most magnificent opera house there. They had streets that were tiled with mosaic tiles, and the stories are that some of the French people, the ladies, used to take their gowns and everything and send them back to France to have them laundered, to bring them back to Africa again, to South America again. And but they lived high there, and well, I guess they had the owning the land was important, owning those big cities, and then we wound up going down further, and the next port was Rio de Janeiro. And in the meantime, we're wearing this old engine out even further, so we wound up having to do major repairs in Rio de Janeiro. And we were there for several weeks getting repairs, so I was not able to work overtime. I didn't get paid for overtime work, but the chief engineer had me keep a log of my extra hours. Now remember, I had tasks to take care of. I had to stand watch with the regular crews and learn all of my crafts in the engine room, and then on top of that, have my study classes to do my lesson work. And he had to sign off, and we mailed these things back to the academy. And they were grading them back there. And so he said, well, let me see your logbook. So I showed him my logbook. He said, you got all these extra hours you've been working. I said, yeah. He said, I don't want to see you for 5 days. So here I go. I made a grand total of $50 a month. That was my pay. I think I was buying a bond, and I took out $25 a month for savings bonds. So I had $25 a month extra. But a carton of cigarettes only cost you 50 cents. So I'd smoke. And so I had money, and I went ashore. And I got ashore in a bumboat. Those are the little boats that take sailors back and forth to the pier. So I go into this cafe, and I ask somebody speak English. Now, I could speak Spanish from school because I took Spanish in high school, but I couldn't speak Portuguese because that's what Brazil is. Mm-hmm. They can understand you, but you can't understand them. It's a complex problem. But I wanted to know how to find a very good hotel. So they said, take this taxi cab, go to the Hotel Copacabana Palace on Atlantic Avenue, where the famous beach is. So I said, I go there. I asked for a room for 5 days. I'm on leave. They said, fine. They could understand English perfectly. I said, how much will that cost me? $4 a day. I said, but, and they're hesitating, but that includes breakfast. So
be a little more than that today, wouldn't it?
Just a little bit more. So we were there a while, and I had this 5 days of luxury and 18 and a little over 18. Phenomenal gambling casino in the back of the hotel. Experiences that just you couldn't ever think that you'd have anything like that happen to you. But it was happening to me.
Even amazing for a guy from New York City.
Amazing for a guy with New York City with $25 a month in his pocket. So anyway.
And that is basically a year after you turned 18, within the first year.
Oh yeah.
See, that's amazing.
Yeah. And but the men I met on board that ship were astounding, absolutely astounding people. The oiler, big buck guy, strong as an elephant. He'd say, now we have to take this filter out, and the sea filter, where we bring in salt water to cool jackets and everything else. We have to clean this every shift. We have to do this right. And we have to make sure the valves are closed right so that we don't have a flood and all of that. And he'd teach me how to do these things, and how to oil an engine, and how to listen to an engine. And but all of these things, and how to take an engine and start up an engine, and you get through a certain RPM, which is a vibration level. Once you got through it, it's smoothed out. But once you try to get through that level, it was rough as a cop. So you had to get through fast. So you had to learn how to run the throttle and everything else. So, but they taught me, and where you could feel a bearing housing and know it was running right. Because you could tell the vibration, temperature, all of these things they were teaching you how to do things. So from Rio de Janeiro, we emptied all of these parts out. And I'm finding out that they're going to the Brazilian Navy, a lot of stuff. Machinery parts and everything else. So strangely enough, while I was at the hotel, I met a man by the name of Given, and he was the vice president of General Electric for all of South America. And he introduced himself to me. He found out I was in my uniform, and he introduced himself to me. And he said, would you help me out and do a job? I said, what can I do for you? He said, you're the first American ship we've had in the harbor since the war. And you're the first Navy person, merchant. See, when I went in, I was in the United States Naval Reserve. That was part of the contract. And he said, we're going to be getting Navy ship people in here. And we're worried about how to take care of these sailors. I said, okay. He said, well, we hear things like canteens up in the United States and things like that. Could you help us design something? I said, okay, fine, I'm glad to help you. So I turned around. They had this beautiful building, open floors, level, everything nice, bathrooms, everything fine. And I said, okay, fine. What do we need? I said, Coca-Cola machines, ping pong tables, pool tables, and a big sign says no drinking. Make your deal with the shore patrol that they come and visit the place, keep the drunks out, no, make sure you don't have any prostitutes coming, visiting the boys, all of these things. And they said that it was magnificent. And this was a little task I did in these days that I was off. And because I was back and forth and I had time off, 5 days were payoff time for me. But then I was able to go ashore periodically during the couple of weeks that we were there. So we finish up our duties in Rio, and we go south to Santos, which is another day's run, and that's the coffee capital. All the coffee coming out of Brazil comes out of Santos. And we loaded up with coffee. Instead of copper from Chile, we load up with coffee beans, and we start heading back up. I think we broke down about 3 times before we got back to Trinidad. And at Trinidad, they unloaded all the coffee and put it on some other ships to go north. And then they took us, and they started using us as a jitney, carrying all different parts to different parts of the city going down the east coast of South America. So we went back down to Recife, and we went back down to New Orleans, and we went back down to Santos. So we made about 3 trips back and forth on the east coast until it was May of '43. Now this is on 15 months from the beginning of time. So all of a sudden we get finish up, we load up with some bauxite, which is the base material for aluminum, and we headed back to Chesapeake Bay. We got up to Chesapeake Bay. We unloaded the ship there, and then we went up to New York and stopped the ship there, and I was discharged. And this was then May of 1943, and I go back to the academy. Well, we were out at sea for 15 months. This was an abnormal training program for a cadet. What they were doing is they would keep the academy, keep the new cadets in the academy for 6 months, send them to sea for 6 months, bring them back to the academy for 6 months, and then have them sit for their licensed engineering tests or deck tests. But we were called, well, we were really morphodite, really. They called us specials because they didn't know what to do with us. And there were only about a half a dozen. There was the deck cadet I was with, and there was some other fellas that had the same experience where they went out and they stayed out longer than they were supposed to. So we took a couple of quick exams at the academy, and then we went down to the War Shipping Administration. And we had to take our license examinations I had to take them for marine engineering, and my partner had to take them for deck officers. He had navigation, he had all kinds of things, and I had all steam propulsion, tests, boilers, turbines, everything, and diesels. And I took the examination on the 6th of June of 1943, so therefore I'm 18 and 6 months old. 19.
19
and 6 months old. So I take the diesel examination, and the next day I take the steam examination. I pass both of them. Automatically, I'm licensed by the United States government as a third-class marine engineer, qualified to operate any tonnage ship propelled by diesels or any tonnage ship propelled by steam. I mean, a third class, I was a third class, and then there's a second class and first class and chief engineer. So I had that. But immediately, when you got the license, you automatically, because you were in the United States Naval Reserve, you became a naval officer. Automatically, I was commissioned as an ensign. But I was a different kind of an ensign. I was United States Naval Reserve, USNR, -EM, engine merchant. So immediately, I was classified only, I was a line officer. I had the star, I had my one stripe for ensign, but I was a line officer, EM, engine merchant, so that really I was an engineering officer in the United States Navy. That occurred on the 6th of July. I was commissioned. On the end of July, they said, we're preparing your papers to go aboard your regular assignment, but we want to keep you busy for a while. So they put me on a temporary assignment, which was a lot of fun, because I stayed at home, right in New York City with my dad. And they sent me to a shipyard out in Long Island Sound that made motor torpedo boats for the British Navy to go into the channel. And they were made of wood. And the reason they were made of wood is that they were non-magnetic. If they hit the magnetic mines out in the channel, they wouldn't blow up, so they were made of wood. And they had these magnificent Chrysler Marine engines in them. And my job was to put them on trial runs out in Long Island Sound and test them out to see that they were qualified to meet speed tests and temperatures and all of that. And the other fellows up on deck, they were taking the ship for putting it through its paces. So I did that for about 3 or 4 weeks, and all of a sudden, I think about the first week in August, I get permanent shipping papers. Go to Norfolk as quick as possible. Transportation, you know, all the technical stuff that the Navy says, and do this and do that and do this, and you're assigned to the USS Santee. Well, the USS Santee is an aircraft carrier. So I said, boy, this is a change. From a scow in the Merchant Marine to an aircraft carrier. But the EM classification tipped me off that this really isn't an Essex class aircraft carrier. This isn't a Saratoga. This isn't any of the frontline jobbies that were out there fair. This was a converted oil tanker.
They put a deck on.
They put a deck on. Can we interrupt for a minute?
No, just go ahead.
Okay.
Or do you?
No, I want to stop and ask you a question.
Okay, sure.
So I was assigned to the USS Santee, oil tanker, magnificent engine room. Oh, beautiful. Steam turbines, high pressure boilers, great crew. And I go on board, nice brand new uniform. I go down to the pier, I get up, and you've seen the practice where you walk up the gangway and you come on the quarter deck and you have to salute the officer of the deck and you say, request permission to come aboard, sir. You do that, request permission to come aboard, sir. Come aboard, now you hand him your papers. Oh, you're coming on board for duty? I said, yes. Mason, okay. He's checked, yeah, okay, we've got you coming. Leave your gear here, and I'll have one of the men take you down to the log room. The log room is where the chief engineer holds his office. That's where they keep the engineering logs. That's why they call it the log room. So here I'm taking down, spanking brand new, 19 and a half. Walk in, and I introduce myself to the chief engineer, and he says, boy, they're really starting them young. And I figured, okay. I said, I'm a licensed merchant marine engineer in steam and diesel and a graduate of the United States Merchant Marine Academy. He says, oh. Because he was used to getting maybe the 90-day wonders out of college. Now, they're wonderful guys, graduate engineers, learn like the devil, but here I am, I sailed.
You've had some experience.
Yeah. And so he, oh, so he said, you said diesels? I said, yeah. He said, okay, I want to introduce you to one of the fellow officers of the A Division. A Division is auxiliary machinery. So he said, I want you to work with him. And he says to O'Reilly, we became very good friends. Hello, are you going to say hello to these gentlemen? So anyway, O'Reilly says, I understand you have your diesel license. I said, yeah. He said, we have a diesel engine room forward for emergency conditions, and we can't get it running. I said, oh, okay. He said, I want you to take charge of all the diesels on the ship for me. That was auxiliary machinery. I said, oh, okay. And so I worked with O'Reilly. Well, I go up to the diesel engine room. You couldn't have bought something better. The finest superior diesel engines, they couldn't get them going. So we turned around. I get a couple of fellows working for me. Find out there's water in the oil lines. The diesel injectors are all worn and scored. So here we are, taking them apart, lapping them in, draining the water out of the system, getting everything. This is taking weeks. This is 3 big diesel engines. So it's taken me weeks to get this job done, and finally, one at a time, put them on the line. And the purpose of it was to use the diesels to unload the turbines that were in the main engine room that were generating electricity, to save the steam, that you could put that extra steam into the main engines and go faster. So you would unload the steam turbines and put the electrical load on the diesel generators and then run a couple of knots faster so that you'd have more wind across the deck for the planes to land and take off. So that was the first task I assigned. But in the meantime, I had to turn around and stand watching the engine room as watch officer in the engine room. Big turbines, Westinghouse turbines, 4 massive Babcock and Wilcox steam boilers. This went on for about 6 months. Where do we go? We start out, we head down south along the coast toward the Bermuda area, chasing submarines. And you'll see on the tower of the ship, our ship was credited with sinking 6 German submarines with the torpedo bombers, caught them, with noise detection underground torpedoes. And then we wound up heading over to Casablanca for the African invasion. We went into Casablanca. And we come flying out of Casablanca, and we got air coverage duty. I'd have to look in the record. My mind just doesn't cover it right now. The Iowa, one of the big battleships, bringing Roosevelt back from Yalta, and we had to give him air coverage for a certain portion of the Atlantic Ocean, and then other people would come on and take them another portion, and we did that. And then we went chase submarines over in the Bay of Biscay or France. Then we come back to Norfolk. The next thing is they take all of our airplanes off the aircraft carrier. They load the whole plane, the flight deck, up with P-38 fighter planes. All of the hangars were filled with machinery parts, and we go to Scotland. We go in a convoy and head over to Scotland, get into Glasgow, Scotland, empty the P-38 fighter planes and everything for the British, and then we come back to Norfolk again. Some leave and in between all that stuff. Then we get orders. Now, the pictures that I'm going to show you relative to what the ship looked like as a tanker and then converted to an aircraft carrier, there were 3 other tankers exactly the same. The Santee, the Swanee, the Shenango, and the Sangamon. You could go aboard and see the nut and bolt were identical. Those 3 sister ships were already out in the Pacific. And so we finished up our tour of duty in the Atlantic and then went to join our 3 sister ships as a squadron complete, and we wound up going to the Pacific. So here we were.
About what date was that? You remember?
This was middle of 43.
Let me ask you, how fast would your
The aircraft carrier go?
Yeah.
19 knots.
So that's
Yeah, wide open 19. And
better than 9 though, right?
oh, better than the 9,
Now,
yes.
this was with the boost that
Oh,
you were getting.
yeah, well,
about,
yeah. The key element on an aircraft carrier is get into the wind, have the wind coming across the deck, and then get every bit of speed you can. Otherwise, the planes can't take off by themselves. Then you have to use catapults. So sometimes you use catapults where you have to be calmed. Otherwise, you use your wind across the deck. You could be in a wind of 10 miles an hour, and you'd wind up with 18 knots of ship. So you had basically 28, 29 miles per hour across the deck, ample to take off from a distance, a running start. So that's the reason. But the diesels help you get a little bit faster. So we wound up catching up with our 3 sister ships out in the Solomons, and we go along and we cover the reason the CVEs, that was the escort carriers classification, was successful. They were cheap. They carried 40 planes, mixture of fighter planes and torpedo bombers, and I like to say they were expendable compared to the big babies.
Mhm.
But we covered all of the landings of the Army as they were going along with MacArthur. We really, in effect, we were not in the United States Navy, we were MacArthur's Navy. Because as he was going, hopping island to island to island to beat the Japs down Guadalcanal and New Guinea and all the way down, and we were part covering his efforts. While we, as a little side, which I think is very important to know, is a good friend of mine in town. I'll mention his name as I get to it. They sent a message to us aboard our ship to say, what would you do to design a new ship, CVE classification, that would be better than the one you have? So the engineering department had to say, well, we'd like a little bit more horsepower, a little bit more speed. We want a divided engine room. We had 2 engines, port and starboard engine. But we had 1 engine room. We wanted 2 engine rooms. In case you were torpedoed on one side, you wouldn't flood the ship. Boiler rooms, we wanted boilers separated. compartments. So the damage control and all of that. So all of these things, they took all of the, and the deck officers had to put all their recommendations in. Flight, construction, everything to make the ships better. They took all of these designs and they built a whole new classification of CVEs to our blueprints. And a very dear friend of mine in town here, Clarence Fredericks, was an officer on the CVE 65, which was the Wake Island, which was right from the design that we created to have built. And Kaiser built about 100 of these CVEs, like one every other day or something like that. But he didn't have the wherewithal to put steam turbines in, because it took too much engineering skills to build a steam turbine. So they put in Skinner Uniflow engines, they're reciprocating engines, but they still could do 19 knots. And they had divided engine rooms, and they had divided boiler rooms, and Clarence and I shoot the breeze every once in a while about our duty. So as we go along these island hopping along past New Guinea into a place called Hollandia and Morotai, and we're doing ground coverage, strafing, landing coverage, all kinds of support for the troops landing. We didn't have a bad life on board ship. We had a lot of duties, but I kid everybody once in a while, it was terrible, tough duty. I remember once that the chef gave us baked Alaska for dessert one time. Oh, it was tough duty. And we always had good food, and you always had a clean sack to sleep in, and it was a constant thinking life, but it was a good life.
That the good bed and the good food are the things you hear most often about Navy service, I think.
That's right. It was a good life. You were sweating like a pig all the time. In the engine room, 100 degrees steady. You stood under a ventilator, the air blowing down on you. That was hotter than hell. You never gained any weight, but you knew what you were doing. You knew what you had to do. And so anyway, we get over, and the next evident thing MacArthur's getting ready to pull off is what he told the Filipinos: I will return. So he's heading for Lady Gulf. And Lady Gulf was just loaded with Japanese, and they had the Japanese fleets over there, and they had Japanese submarines all over there, and we had one dickens of a war on our hands. Our 4 sister ships were in a group, and they were off to the side, and we were near Lady Gulf. I'll tell you an experience, very, very gratifying, the kind of people in the Navy. The Japanese tried to come through the Surigaya Straits. Here's the islands, and here's the Surigaya Straits. And something occurred that had not occurred since the time of Nelson at Trafalgar. It's what they call crossing the T. The Japanese were coming through and in a straight line with their battleships. If they ever got through, they would have devastated everything. Motor torpedo boats were coming in, going after them. They were breaking through, but they come in a straight line. They can just picture this. An admiral called Oldendorf turns around, and here they come, and he crosses the T. He takes his battleships and comes all along this way. And what's he doing? They can only shoot at him with his front guns. He's got broadside going at them. He devastates the Japanese fleet going through there and saves the whole landing. I mean, you can tell the air boys they did a job, but Oldendorf crossing the T saved the whole invasion of Lady Gulf. While we were there, I think we were probably 30, 40 miles offshore. Our planes were going in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. All of a sudden, must have been 10 after 7 in the morning. I'm getting ready to go on watch at 8 o'clock. Get out of my bed. I never wore my uniform down below because it was too hot. I always used a jumpsuit. I had a hat, jumpsuit, and I had my insignia on. I was a JG then, junior grade lieutenant. And because it was loose around the waist, comfortable. So I'm all set. All of a sudden, a kamikaze goes right in the flight deck of our aircraft carrier. And I'll show you some of the pictures that I have that you can take and look at them. We blast a hole, but fortunately he landed right, he crashed in with a 500-pound bomb, right in the intersection of two 16-inch I-beams. So most of the damage went up, and he bent the beams, and the deck was all destroyed and everything else. Well, that was one thing. 10 minutes after the kamikaze hit us, a torpedo hit us on the port side. A two-man sub was loose in the bay and got us. So we were on a list like this. Well, I'm forward, where my bunk was, and I have to get aft to the engine room, where that's my battle station, down in the boiler room. So, get down into the hangar deck. I only recently found out who the man was, by the name of Wade. I'm crawling along, the whole hangar deck is on fire. There's bombs being loaded onto planes. Planes are on fire from the torpedo and the kamikaze. And the two of us are crawling together over to where a sprinkler system is. And the two of us are together pulling on a chain to open up the sprinkler valve to get water in the hangar deck. And we finally got that open, and we got the fire under control. And then I wound up, I don't know where he went. Never found out who he was until about 6 months ago. He passed away, but so anyway. I finally get down to the engine room. I go to the log room. I said, tell the chief, I'm here, I'm heading down the boiler room. He said, okay. I go down the boiler room. Here, I'm soaking wet, soaking with salt water from the sprinkler system. So I get one of the kids, I said, go topside, get me some clothes. So I go up into the evaporator room where we make fresh water for drinking. And I go up there and I take myself a nice fresh water shower, soak down everything else, dry myself off, put all new dry clothes on, and I stay in my boiler room. And here the ship is like this, listing, with a big hole in the flight deck. Well, damage control parties with the diesels that we had all over the ship pump ballast from different places in the ship and bring us up to an even keel. The damage control men get boilerplate, big thick plate, and they get these power velocity guns, and they're shooting these plates into the hangar deck, the flight deck, where the hole was. 2 hours later, we were landing planes.
That's amazing.
That is amazing.
Well, let me ask you something.
Yeah.
When you're in the boiler room, were you below the water line, right?
Oh, sure. But the torpedo hit forward of the engine room by 10 feet, forward of the boiler room, because the boiler room was after the engine room, and in between the tanks. That's the wonderful part of the oil tanker. You had wing tanks. You had tanks that were 10 feet wide or 8 feet wide. They were wing tanks. And then you had main center tanks, and you had another wing tank on the other side, port side. The torpedo hit this wing tank and ruptured a small cofferdam. They always had cofferdams for leakage control. Mm-hmm. And that's what was adding water. The tank where it hit actually had water in it at the same level, so the hole in the side of the ship didn't mean a thing. It was the cofferdam that was taking the water on, that we had to pump and put water in other ballast areas to get the ship on even keel. I've got some pictures showing you the size of the hole in the side of the ship that you could drive a Mack truck through.
Yeah, David would want to get pictures of it.
Tremendous hole. So here we are, even keel, hole in the side of the ship, monstrosity hole, with a beam that's swinging in the water as it boom, boom, making noise all the time. Back up to 19 knots. And they kept us online for 3 more days. We were flying regular combat schedules for 3 more days before they say, okay, you can pull out, head to Pearl Harbor for repairs. With the steel plate that the damage control fellows shot into the flight deck, with the ballast pumped out in even keel, we just kept right on going.
Well, that kind of repairs would be similar to what the Yorktown did from the time it left the Battle of the Coral Sea to went to Midway, wouldn't it?
Yep.
Same kind of on-the-go repairs.
Absolutely. And we just kept on going. We point up, we go in to Pearl. We had signaled ahead, told them exactly where the damage was, what cofferdam, what bilge numbers and everything else, the flight deck locations of the whole thing. We pulled in, went into dry dock. They had a patch ready for us. Put it right on the side of the ship. We were out of the dry dock in one day, heading for Long Beach, California, for final repairs. We get repaired, then we go back out to sea again. And then we wound up with Guam, Saipan, Tinian, Okinawa. And that's when we saw the flight, we knew the flight fellows quite often, the pilots, we knew them quite well. And they came in one night and they got their jackets and their little packets of maps and everything else. I said, where you heading? We're going to a place called Okinawa. Oh, show us on the map. Well, when you look at a map of where Okinawa and Japan is, it's about this far. We said, holy God, you mean to say we're going to be that close to Japan? We were off Okinawa. Well, I'll tell you about Guam. This is a good story. We pull into Guam. Well, as Guam started to get invaded, it was a big challenge for the Marines to take Guam. We were covering. They took all our planes off, and they put a full squadron of F-4U Corsairs on, Marine fighters, on our flight deck. But they didn't have any tailhooks. They weren't coming back on board that ship. Their job was to get and land at the Guam airport that the Marines were fighting to take. Can you imagine? Go that way, but we don't know if the landing's there, but the Marines are there to try to get that landing for you. All of these planes took off from our ship, and they all landed safely at Guam. So we're in the area for a couple of more weeks, and we pull into Guam Harbor. And the officer of the deck, topside, calls, Lieutenant Mason, report to the officer of the deck. I said, what the does he want? So I gone up, he says, I've got a message for you, Jim. I said, what? He says, here's a message. Dear Jim, if you can come ashore, maybe we can have a picnic together and bring a friend, and I'll bring a friend also. Love, Andrea. Eleanor and I grew up in New York City. We went to the Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church there all our lives. And this girl was Andrea Kinnis, and she was now in Guam, working with the Red Cross, and she found out our ship was in the harbor, and I said, my God, what do I do? He says, go see the exec. So the executive officer is really the guy who runs the ship for the captain. So I said, go in to see the executive officer. He's a commander, and I'm a lowly JG. I said, Commander, would you read this? And I give him the message. He said, when do you want to go? That's all he said, when do you want to go? I said, as soon as I can. He said, okay, you have my permission. Tell the chief I gave you authority. So, put the wheels going. I said, well, let's see now. I got to go all the way out to the air base. I said, I got to take a friend with me. So smart Jim says, okay, I know. I go down, and they go down to the steward officer, the officer of the mess, and he's a young JG. And I say, I want 2 egg crates with food in it. He said, don't you know there's a war going on? I said, yes, I know. I said, do what I tell you. I want fresh bread, pies, tinned hams, you name it, in 2 egg crates. We're going to shore for a picnic. He said, what do you need 2 for? I said, you'll find out. So we get 2 egg crates full of food, and we get into the gig, and we go ashore, and we get on the dock. And I said to the Marine guards there, I said, where's the Beachmaster's office? He says, right over there. So I go into the Beachmaster's office, and there's a major. I said, Major? Yeah. I said, I'd like to have a Jeep loaded with gasoline and keep it for the day. And he said, don't you know there's a war going on? I said, yes, sir, I do know that. However, I have an egg crate outside that's loaded with tinned hams, fresh bread, all kinds of nice things, and it's whoever gives me a Jeep for the day loaded with gasoline, he says, here are the keys. The 2 of us went out, we picked up the girls, and we went to the beach. But we had to, one guy had to stay on the beach, on the shore. I had to stay on the beach on the blanket with a .45 laying in my lap while the guy and the 2 girls were out swimming. And then he would come in and sit on it because the Japanese was still running around that crazy island and killing people. But we had our picnic for the day. We took the girls back and we left all the supplies that were in there with them and we come back. But that was my episode in the war in Guam. And I tell that story all over. But she said, dear Jim, can you come ashore? And we did. So anyway, carry on the war. We turned around after Guam. Then we went up and we were covering some of the landings. We went into the China Sea for a little bit and then come back out and we covered the invasion in Okinawa. And that was on April Fool's Day. And it was a real good strategy. All of our planes were flying in on the east coast of Okinawa, and they had dummy sections there, army boats and going in as if they were going to land. But the real invasion was the Marines come in on the other side of the island. But that was a terrible war, Okinawa. For 75 days, we did nothing else but wear a groove in the ocean, back and forth, back and forth. Every morning, general quarters, flight going out, flights coming back, flights going out. Because that was when the Japanese really started to throw the kamikazes at everybody, at Okinawa. And the people that really took the beating were the picket boats. The destroyers were the outer circle of the contact. The next line were other types of craft, and then the aircraft carriers were way out safe. They never really got out to you there because they were going after the other boats. That's where the Hancock set on fire. A lot of men were lost in the Navy at the invasion of Okinawa. That was a bad war. So all of a sudden then the war ended. We went up to Japan, to Wakayama, which was in Honshu. And we went ashore there. We walked in a little fishing town, wooden sidewalks. The Japanese would jump off the wooden sidewalk and stand in the mud. As you walked by, they were afraid you were going to kill them. You had to carry fresh water with yourself and your sidearms when you went ashore. We come back. They took all of our people off the ship, all the pilots. We took all of our planes off, put them on other ships, other carriers, and we went down to Formosa, which is now called Taiwan. Mm-hmm. We couldn't get into the harbor because the harbor wouldn't take the draft of our ship. So we sent destroyers in. The destroyers went in and picked up prisoners of war dating back to the Bataan Death March. A lot of Dutch, a lot of British, just a couple of Americans, and the destroyers would bring them out back and forth, shuttling, go in, get a load, bring them back, and they'd bring them up to our catwalk. As they brought them up the gangway, our sailors would strip them, say, what do you want to keep? Some type of a memento, a wallet, or a little picture, or anything that they wanted to keep, they could keep. Everything else, overboard. Hot salt water showers, rinse down, soap, shaved, deloused, everything, putting fresh clothes on them, and then they were assigned to one of our ship's company men. You got one of them, I got one of them, you got one of them, and you had a buddy system. You had to take care of that guy while he was on board that ship. And we had all over the hangar deck, all over the flight deck, we had cots all over the place, and we had, I think we must have carried about 300 or 400 men out of Formosa, all the way down. We took them down to the Philippines and then turned them over to their nation country as free men. It was terrible to see them. You see the pictures, skin and bones? That was it, personified. That was what you saw of what these men coming back. Some of them got sick on us because the sailors were so glad to take care of them, they were giving them candy bars. And that's the last thing that those poor guys needed was a Milky Way candy bar. And so we finally caught what was going on, but the sailors took care of them. That was a buddy system, and we got rid of them. And then we went on what they called the magic carpet duty. We had no airplanes anymore, no pilots, nothing. And we did prisoners of war exchange, and then all of a sudden we started to bring back some of our own troops back to San Diego. And we did that, I think about 3 or 4 trips. And finally, I'm on board this ship as a lieutenant junior grade. The chief engineer goes out on points. The assistant chief engineer goes out on points. The chief petty officers go out on points. The first class water tenders go out on points. And here I am, the senior engineering officer on board this aircraft carrier as a lieutenant junior grade, and nobody knew how to fix boilers. I had to teach the guys how to roll tubes to repair, because these kids just didn't have this experience. They were firemen second class, firemen first class, and that was it.
Well, explain what you mean by points. I understand that.
Well,
Make sure.
at the end of the war, depending on the amount of time you had in service, you got so many points for discharge. Well, I didn't have enough points for discharge because these men were in the Navy longer than I was, even though I had time in the Merchant Marine and training and everything. So they were discharged earlier than I was.
Was time of service the only thing that...
Time of service, that was all. And so therefore, they got points and they were discharged to go home. So they went home. They went home on freighters. They were discharged all over the world, and they wound up going home. And there I was. So they turned around. We pull in and go to San Diego, and that's when you're going to see that large picture there, and I'll show you.
Yeah.
That was the last crew of people on board the ship. And they turn around and they send on a new chief engineer, who would then become my superior. And he was a lieutenant commander. Rightfully so. Good, that was the rank for that job. And he comes aboard the ship, introduces himself to me. I said, "Hi, Chief." He said, "I'm Chief Engineer." And he said, "I want to say something to you. I'm not going to bother you if you don't bother me." He said, "All of my experience was I was a PT boat captain and squadron commander of a PT boat crew, and I don't have the slightest damn idea what an engine room looks like. I don't know anything about boilers, this engine, and I don't expect to go down there, so you get us home." And that's the truth. So we got home, and we got into San Diego, and we had to then take the ship back down to the canal, back through the canal, up to Boston to put it out of commission. So there's still the captain on board the ship, and he gets a hold of me and he said, "I see your time is up, you're ready to be discharged." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Would you like to stay on board with me?" I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I've got a whole bunch of ships to put out of commission." He said, "You can get your JG and you can get lieutenant right away, instead of waiting some more time, but we get you lieutenant. And I need your engineering skills to put the boilers out of commission, put them in mothballs.
Mhm.
I said, Captain, the answer is no. I'm going home. I said, because I've experienced meeting some of the new sharp ensigns coming on board this ship out of the academy. And I said, these kids are good. They're crackerjack engineers. They need experience. I said, they're far ahead of me in math, in sciences, and chemistry, all the things necessary to be a good engineer. I'm going home.
How long did you stay at Midway? I mean,
At
where-
Midway,
yeah.
15
Now,
months.
where'd you go when you left there?
I came back to the States and I got they gave me a 30-day furlough to go home. And then I had to report in to Camp Lejeune down at Jacksonville, North Carolina. Well, as far as any more action was concerned, that is all for me. I spent 2 years down at Camp Lejeune, and then it was in April '45. My enlistment was up, and I extended for 2 years. And I thought the war was going to go on for another 2 years, the way things were going.
Well, fortunate it wasn't.
But it wasn't. It ended in about 6 months. But it wasn't too long after I extended, and they sent me back to Pearl Harbor.
What were you doing at Camp Lejeune those 2 years?
Then at Camp Lejeune, I was in it's really training outfits for the then. It's a base artillery battalion. They had schools on all the artillery weapons, the 155s and the 90s and the 40s and the 20s. And I was in the headquarters of Service Battery for the base artillery battalion, and we all set up all the communications, the radio and telephone communications for those classes when they'd go out to Onslow Beach to do their live firing, and that's what I did for 2 years.
Well, that was better than storming those islands in the Pacific.
Well, yeah, it was. A whole lot better. Of course, I kept up with all of it, all those landings they were making on in the Solomons and then the Marshalls and the Gilberts and the Iwo Jima, but Guam, Saipan, Tinian, but I missed all of it.
Well, you said they sent you back then to Pearl
Well, when
Harbor.
I went back, they were fighting on Okinawa.
Okay. Yeah, that was near the end.
Yeah, they sent a bunch of us when we went back. They sent us across country to San Diego or Camp Pendleton, and then we went down to San Diego, Coronado, to a Navy base there, and then went to a school where they were showing us all and trying to show you the ships and the jet planes there, and show the silhouettes of them so you could identify them. And went through that school, and then that's when they went back to Pearl Harbor after they finished that. Went through that school down in Coronado there for a few weeks.
Now, when did you get back to Pearl Harbor? About what time?
Well, I was in the same thing, doing the same thing then that I was had done for 2 years over at Jacksonville at Camp Lejeune. There's a Navy, there's an island over near Maui. It's Kawalawa is the name of it, and the Navy had a naval gun firing range over there. And the group that I was in would go over to Kawalawa, and we'd get in contact with the destroyers when they'd come over to practice naval gunfire, and we'd get in contact with them by radio, and we'd designate targets for them to fire on and spot for them.
Now, when was it you went back to Pearl?
when
to
I
Hawaii.
went back,
Yeah.
it was sometime in, I see, extended in April. It was about June or July, I guess.
June or July of 45.
45, yeah.
So is that where you were when the war ended?
I was still at camp. I was at Camp Catlin, the camp that was being built there, the same place I was at when it began that morning. Except the camp was, when I was there, it was just under construction. They had some of the all the living quarters there were tents. We stayed in tents while I was there. But when I went back over the second time there, it was they had all wooden buildings there, and I was at the same place when it ended as it was the morning it began.
Well, when did you get out of the Army? I mean,
When I get out, well, I had about 18 months to do. This was the war ended in September, October.
September. It signed it. Armistice.
45, and I stayed there. I stayed at Pearl Harbor. I stayed at Camp Catlin until sometime after the first of the year, early 46, and then they sent a bunch of us that I was with there that there at Camp Catlin. They sent us out to Guam, and we went up to an island. It's up in the north of Guam. It was Pagan Island. They sent us up there. We built a naval gunfiring range up on Pagan, and then that's what I spent the rest of my time doing. The same thing as I was doing at Pearl Harbor. We'd go up to Pagan, and destroyers would come up from Guam and practice naval gunfire.
Now this is after the
It's all after
war.
the war. Yeah, I spent the rest of my time I spent out there on Guam and Pagan, except for about 6 weeks I got to go on a cruise to China, to Shanghai, and to a couple of Japanese islands there. That went to that big Navy base where you Coast School, however you pronounce it. I don't remember how to pronounce it. We went there. Went to that island. I guess that's one of the main ones. Just one Tokyo and Yokohama one.
Okay, yeah, Shikoku and Kyushu and those. Yeah, there.
We went up. Yeah, we got Liberty there, and then we'll see us. We went there several times, but got Liberty more than once.
Were you able to see the destruction that had taken place there?
Well, yeah, we did there in Tokyo.
Yeah.
They had that big something like the Union Station, a big railroad depot, and then it was bombed out there. You could get inside and see sky above, but at night those people that were homeless there, you had to they just slept around the walls there in that Union Station there at night. You had to just walk over them. The people sleeping there to get so didn't have anywhere else to live to sleep. Yeah. And you see plenty of damage there. That was when they were bombing there. There was big B-29s. They started flying nonstop. From Guam and Saipan and Tinian, from the Marianas, and we're bombing the firebomb in Tokyo.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, they burnt that place up.
Yeah, their houses were built out of materials that was easily flammable, so they really burned badly.
Yeah, there was a lot of damage done there. Well, that depot there, it was a big building there, and they were still using it, but you could see the whole bombs had dropped. They dropped on the top of the building there, and there were holes in it. You could just see the blue sky and see the night and stars at night from down inside that depot.
They repaired the tracks and were still using them, but the building was not repaired. Is that right?
Yeah, it was damaged, but they were still using it. They hadn't got around to repairing it. I guess they did finally repair it or tear it down, rebuild it one. But at the time we were there, they had the damage. You could see the results of the damage, and that it hadn't been anything done to repair it at that time.
When were you discharged from the Marine Corps?
When?
Mm-hmm.
It was in May 47.
So you pretty much did your full.
Well, I suppose I got back to the States there. I didn't get back to the States in time to be discharged there when my 6 years was up. That was about a month later getting back to the States. I went back. We went to San Francisco, and then they sent me across country to Quantico, and they discharged me in Quantico.
Now
It was the same barracks there. It was a casual company then, but it was the same barracks. They had the post signal battalion was in the same one I went to school in. Focused real good,
He can tell
a
us
little
about
better.
All right, just tell us about it. That's
Yes, that's right.
And I knew that boy drew cartoons every now and then, but I had never seen this one until she sent me his daughter sent me the copy of it. Yeah,
now that was at Midway, right?
yeah, Midway. You can tell down there. It's something about they thought Colonel Shannon sent the cartoon to Admiral Nimitz,
Uh-huh.
and she said they thought, she said in that letter that they thought the original was at the Naval Academy in Annapolis now.
This, in case it didn't show up on the camera there, Cody says, this cartoon was drawn by Marine Corps Private Foster R. Henson, one of the defenders of Midway. It was framed with pieces from a downed Japanese plane and presented to Admiral Nimitz shortly after the Battle of Midway. And
I think I saw that plane that they're talking about there. Because there's a plane, after they bombed us there, they started strafing. And there's a plane came by us, just a few feet out in front of us. And it was shot down. All the machine guns there on the island there, through that middle part of the island, opened up on him. And he'd been hit when he came by us. That the tip of his left wing there had about 2 or 3 feet trailing. It was
just hanging on?
It's still hanging on, but the plane was flying. He was flying it just like that, and I see those tracers, boy, just one right after another coming right out the nose of that plane, and that pilot was sitting up in there. He was dressed up. He had a white shirt on, a black tie, and a goggles, and a helmet. And boy, he was firing that machine gun there, and he just zipped by us. And you didn't get a very good, too long a chance to look at him because so much smoke there. After they bombed us there was some fuel tanks over on the beach there, just not too far from where we were, and they were burning. And there's nothing but black smoke and fire, and a lot of times you couldn't even see anything for the smoke, and then the wind would blow, and it make a opening there. You could see the sky, but for the most part, there after they bombed it, is more smoke and fire than anything else.
The islands there at Midway, both of them are real small, aren't they?
They what?
How big are the islands there at Midway, the two islands? They're neither one very big.
Well, they're not. They're really not very big. The small island they say had I think 900 and some acres, and the large island, that's the one I was on. It had I think about 11 or 1,200 acres. You ain't got much running room
No,
there.
that's right. Well, what made them valuable was the location, not their size, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, during the attack, now, when the time I spent on Midway, I was in radar. I was on radar all the time. But the watchstanders there in the headquarters and service battery, that's what I was in there. Midway too. I was always in headquarters and service batteries, where I think every place I was stationed at. But if you weren't on watch, we had 4 machine guns. The H&S battery did that. We had the man, and I was on that radar. That was it was an aircraft warning radar, but it was a backup radar for the radar that ran 24 hours, operated by the Navy. And anytime they had to shut down for any reason, if they have maybe have some trouble and had to shut down for make repairs, and then we'd go in operation. Or if they had a questionable target, the colonel sometimes he would order us to go in operation too, to see if we could verify that target and pick up the same thing that the Navy radar was picking up.
Get a second opinion.
Yeah, the radars were the same, but they was on about a 250-foot tower. Their antenna was, and ours was just on a van, a trailer that you could raise and lower with a winch, and it's about 40 feet only about 40 feet in the air. But that's what I was doing there the whole time I was on Midway. I'd finished radio school, and actually I hadn't done any work on radios until I went back to it 2 years. I went till I went back in 1943. Then they put me back in radio. And that's when I worked on radio, the radio operator the rest of the time I was in service. The way I got in radio, one afternoon after I was in boot camp, they said anybody wanted to go to the radio station and take an aptitude test, they could go over there that afternoon. And I thought, that's a good chance to get off that parade ground out there. They got close to the drill. It's hot down there. I got to get out of that for a while that afternoon. And they went over there to the radio station. They told us half a dozen characters in Morse code, and then they sent us a few to see if we could recognize them, and they didn't tell us anything about how we did, and we didn't hear any more about it until we finished boot camp, where everybody was going to be sent to. But when they started reading out the assignments at boot camp, I think every one of us that went over to the radio station was sent to the Post Signal Battalion in Quantico, and went to either telephone or radio school.
Well, that was good. That's lucky for you, wasn't it? Candace, can you think of anything that we haven't discussed that he would?
It was about 16 weeks, I think it was. Well, I'd go to bed at 9, get up in the morning, you're hearing Morse code.
Yeah, I never have been able to figure out how you can understand the dits and the dots.
And every week you had to check out. There's so many. You had to copy so many copies solid for a minute, or not more than make no more than, I don't know how many mistakes it was in 3 minutes. And then you had to send so much, you had to improve every week from one week to the next. You had to show an improvement. 10:19 on the morning of June the 4th, that was, Japan was at its high water mark. So
Yeah.
5 minutes later, it had lost 4 aircraft carriers. I don't think I really did any sleeping at all, actually, because they told us there that just about the time to expect the attack, and they weren't off very far. Well, they were pretty close.
The intelligence was pretty good there
Yeah.
to know where those ships
Yeah,
were.
they knew almost to the minute when they were going to attack.
But still, as big as that ocean is, they were lucky to find them, weren't they?
They what?
I said, as big as that ocean is, they were lucky to find them when they got ready to attack.
Yeah.
Our ships.
Yeah. Well, they picked the radar picked them up that morning. They were 95 miles out, and there were 3 of us that manned our machine gun, and we 3 went. But that morning there, the attack, they had told us about what time to expect it, and we'd known there for a month or more, I guess, that they were coming, that they were just about the day they would attack. And they started sending supplies out there and reinforcements and more airplanes and more. Yeah, well, there were ships coming in just every few days there. In fact, there's a ship that they unloaded and left that night there about sundown before the attack the next morning. It brought in a bunch of airplanes. But Admiral Nimitz came out there, and he's over at our mess tent there one afternoon. He and the colonel were standing out there talking, and we went over there to eat. And boy, I got a good look at Admiral Nimitz. You know, he was the commander-in-chief of the Pacific. You know, he's standing there with the colonel. He's wearing khaki just like the rest of us were, and they were standing there talking. I went by him real kind of.
Got a good look?
Yeah, looking at it, got a good look out of the corner of my eye at him.